Good morning. Today's daf is daf Pei Tet. We are up to the two dots at the very top line of Pei Tet Amud Aleph. My apologies for not having the on-screen Q&A along with it. I've been away and so haven't had a chance to do that. But God willing, next week when I'm back, we will pick up again with that on-screen as well. But we're up to Chatzi Log Shemen Latoda. Our Mishnah, we're in the 10th chapter of Menachot, and we have been going through the different um, uh, liquid-based measurement sizes of things that were in the Beis Hamikdash and what they were used for. And so we said that there were seven different sizes according to the Tanna Kama: a hin, a half a hin, a third of a hin, and a quarter of a hin. And then there was a log, that's four. A log, half a log, and a quarter of a log. That's three more. Four plus three is seven. Those were the seven measurements, and we saw that there was an opinion that there were seven. That the concept of seven different measurement utensils was a either halacha l'moshe Sinai or gemara gemirule. Bottom line is a tradition that we had, and there was some debate as to exactly which which sizes there were. That was the Tanna Kama that I just provided. But in any event, then we're now talking about what the Chatzi Log was used for, and we said that it was used for the loaves of a Toda. So now we quote a Brisa, as we are on the second line of Pei Tet Amud Aleph, Tanya, that's going to provide the Torah-based source for the Mishnah saying that the half log is used for the Toda. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ma Talmud Lomar, Bashemin, Shnei Pamim. So if you take a look at the Pasuk in, Torah reading from Tzav, that we say, Im al Toda Yakrivenu, that if you're bringing the mincha offering with a Toda, or you're bringing bread with the Toda, Hikriv al Zebach HaToda, Chalot matzot belulat bashemen. So you're going to bring with the Toda matzah loaves that are mixed with oil. Urikike matzot mishuchim bashemen. And you're going to use wafers of unleavened wafers that are mixed with oil, that are going to be mishuchim bashemen is not mixed, but rather spread or anointed with oil. V'solas murbeches, and flour that is going to be boiled, chalos bilulos bashemen, and also that will be mixed with oil. So we had three different kinds of matzah-based loaves that are with the Toda, and then of course we have 10 loaves that are going to be non-matzah based, and so this being the day after Pesach, so we can consider that a Daf Yomi coincidence, because we've gone back to saying Mizmor Lasoda in our davening, which we skipped over the course of Pesach because the Toda includes loaves that are chametz, and so the pasuk actually has the word belulot has the word bashemen three times. So again, it says matzot belulos bashemen, urikike matzot meshuchim bashemen, v'solos meberchas chalos belulos bashemen. So we have that three different times. But our Baraisa is going to focus first on the fact that it mentions it two times. This is Rabbi Akiva speaking, and he says it mentions it two times. And why does it mention it two times? If we only had the one reference to oil, I would say that in general, mincha offerings all have a log of shemen with them. So I would have thought that similarly we would need a log of shemen for a Toda offering. Achshav shekasav bashemen, but now that it's written twice, havi ribui acha ribui, we have an inclusion, something that suggests extra twice, and the ein ribui acha ribui elo, and we don't, and two inclusions actually come to say that actually we're trying to exclude something. So what is it that we're trying to exclude? Miyato hakasov lechatzi log, that we try and reduce the amount of oil, and the measurement that is one notch essentially below a full log is a chatzi log. And so as a result, that's what it's the story. One second though, riboy acha riboy, chad riboy hu. how can you say, Rabbi Akiva, that this is a multiplication, a two different inclusions? It's really just one, because how do we know that there's oil used at all? The first reference to Bashemen needs to tell us that there's oil in the first place. As Rashi tells us, and we're going to look at the Rashi, we're going to use both Rashi and Rashi Ksiv Yad as appropriate. Right now we're in the Rashi, top of the page, second line. Chad riboy, dechad Bashemen sarach legufei. We need one reference to the Bashemen for the purpose of referring to the oil itself. The idach b'shemen, and then the other one, chad ribuye l'chud. There's only one alone. So how can you say that there are two? Ella, so the answer is the following. Ilu lo nemar b'shemen kol ikar. If we didn't have the reference to shemen at all, hayiti omer, I would have said, harehu kechol hamenachos lalog. I would have said, you don't need to tell me about shemen, because shemen generally, with respect to every mincha offering, it's a log. Now there are some exceptions, namely the sinner's mincha offering, which doesn't have any oil, or the mincha offering associated with the sota that doesn't have any oil. But that our general rule would be that you would use an entire, you would have to have oil with it, as Rashi tells us. Next Rashi on third line now. Harehu kechol hamenachos l'log. Delo matzinu chalot urikikin. When it comes to the loaves and the wafers that are included in the mincha offering below shemen, you're never find them without oil. Now, it is, like I said, it is true that there are some mincha offerings that are without oil, but they're not chalot or rakikin, so you can't say anything about them and suggest that this would not have oil. So achshav shenemar bashemen bashemen havi ribuy acha ribuy. So as a result, it is in fact two ribuyim, two additions, and therefore we can say that two pluses essentially make a minus. The ein ribuy acha ribuy el lamayit miato hakasub l'chatzi log. And so as a result, the double ribuy language tells us that instead of a full log, we're going to use a half log.
So
So
how do we get the double reboy again? I mean,
one we
go
don't
ahead.
need to. So the bottom line is that the Torah never needed to include the word bashemen. So when you say bashemen, it's telling you to include something that we already know. So that's one riboy. So that one first riboy, if we only had that, it would say maybe we should include extra oil. Because after all, we would know that you need to include some oil because these things require oil. Because mincha offerings that are chalot and rikikim all are always have oil. And then the second one is a ribuy acha ribuy, and so that tells us, hey, we actually need to reduce the amount of oil instead of add to it. Now,
Okay, so then when we read the Rashi before, I'm a little when Rashi says Chad Riboy, the
that
Chad
was the
Shemen
question.
Tzarich the Gufe, right? He says
That
that.
was the question. That was the question that the Gemara was asking a question on the Brisa and saying, I don't understand. Don't you need the first shemen to tell us about the oil at all? And therefore you only have one ribui? And so the response of the Gemara was no, you don't
Uh-huh.
need the first shemen to tell us about the shemen at all, because no chalot and rikikin are ever made without oil. We would know that you would use oil just like everything else. And what would it
Uh-huh.
mean if you would use oil but just like everything else? That would mean that you would have a full load. So therefore, we now have two references to Bashemen that are extra, and therefore we have riboy acha riboy, and that tells us don't use a full load, use which is comes to mamai, comes to reduce, and so as a result, we use a half load. Now the
Okay,
question.
and when quickly, what does Rabbi Akiva do with the third Bashemen? Or are we going to get to that?
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. Absolutely. In fact, that's where we're going to go right now. So this question and answer was an aside from the brisa, and we jump back to the brisa. Yachol yehei chatzi log zem mischalek l'shloshes minim. Now, how many different kinds of matzah are there, unleavened bread, in the Toda? There are three. So I might have thought that we should divide this half log into sixths, and we would have 3/1/6 of a log, and we would put 1/6 with the chalos, 1/6 with the rakikin, and 1/6 with the revuchos, and that would be one. Yeah, and that would get us everything. But so that's our initial opinion. I would think you divide it among all three. For the chalos and the rakikin and the ravicha, again, the chalos are sort of traditional loaves, even though they're unleavened. Rakikin are wafers and unleavened, so they might be more similar to matzah, but of course they still have oil in it, so it's not quite. It's almost like an unleavened pancake. Uravicha and the ravicha are made in a method that is most similar to our bagels today, where you use scalded water in order to do, or at least scalded flour in order to make the loaves. So
So they're
kishehu,
leavened.
what?
They're leavened then, right?
No, they're unleavened, unleavened.
But,
All
but a
three of these
bagel,
are.
when a bagel is
Yeah,
leavened,
obviously a bagel is I'm talking about the methodology as
uh-huh.
opposed to the underlying flour and water mixture. So kishehu omer bashemen biravicha. So but now we have the third shemen in the pasuk. And the third shemen is referenced specifically by Ravicha. And what does that tell us? She'ain Talmud Lomar Riba Shemen LeRavicha. We're supposed to use more of the shemen for the Ravicha than for the other two. So what does that mean? What's the implication of that bottom line? So how do we deal with it? Maybe chotzi log shemen v'chotzehu. So you take the half log shemen and you're going to divide it into halves, two quarter halves. So right, so the two quarters of a log. Chetzio, one quarter of the log, lechalos l'rakikin, will be split between the chalot and the rakikin. So in those two cases, you'd end up using an eighth of a log for each. Of the chetzio, and half of it, meaning the other quarter of the log, l'ravicha, that would be used for the ravicha. And so that's why the third shemen is there to tell us it's a riboy. And that's telling us that when it comes to the Ravicha, you're going to use more Shemen for the Ravicha than for the Chalos and the Rakikin.
How
Okay.
much are you using then? Is it more than a half?
No. Well, you only have a half to split among all three. So we're going to
Uh-huh.
use half of the half or a quarter for the Revichin, and then we'll split the other half or the other quarter, 1/8 and 1/8 for the Chalos and the Rakikin. So the Chalos and Rakikin each get an eighth, and the Revichin get a quarter, and a quarter plus an eighth is equal to the total of the half that we have for the Toda offering. So now, in responding to Rabbi Akiva, Amrlo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says to Rabbi Akiva, Akiva, imata merabe kol hayom kula bashemen bashemen. You could, speak all day about your learning of bashemen bashemen. Eini shomei alecha. I'm not going to listen to you because elichatzi log shemen letoda. Uravia Shemin Lenazir, Vachadasar Yom Shebein Nida Lenida, Halacha Lamoshe Misinai. The whole concept of how much oil you're supposed to use for a toda, that's a Halacha Lamoshe Misinai. And similarly, the fact that you use a quarter log of oil for a Nazir, that's Halacha Lamoshe Misinai. And which is of course relevant to our case. And then the third item that is halakha l'moshe Sinai that we are referencing is the fact that there are 11 days between nida, one nida period, and another nida period. Of course, we're coming up eventually on Maseches Nida, but in a little while. But the bottom line is that is a reference to the fact that biblically, the measurement of a nida, if according to the Torah, and I guess that's not this week's parsha, but next, but in when we read Tezria Mitzorah, that will be covering that. So in the nida situation, so you have a woman has her menstrual flow, so it triggers a 7 day period. Doesn't make a difference how much flows if it's considered her need a period. So then she has to wait 7 days. There's no Shiva Nikiyim, nothing like that biblically. But we essentially treat all nido today, and once she has that initial need of blood, any additional blood during after that 7 day period for a period of 11 days, it would be treated as if it was not Nida
The
blood,
Zav.
but a Zava. But she would be treated as a Zava. And a Zava, the first 2 days of bleeding, you have to wait 1 day afterwards to be treated as if to become Tahora again. But if you have 3 consecutive days of seeing blood, so then you would have to wait a Shiva Nikiyim, and then you'd be able to use the mikvah. And what we do today is effectively we treat every nida as if it were a zava, and even if she only bleeds a little bit, we still treat it as a zava, and then we have additional days of watching that are on top of that, and all of that is what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying is halacha lamoshe misinai. Okay, so that ends that discussion, and we now quote the next piece from our Mishnah. And our Mishnah mentioned belog hayamoded, that what they would measure with the log was basically a typical mincha offering. And there was the debate between the Tanakama, who said that you would have one log for every isaron of flour that was in a mincha, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov would say, no, you can use a much larger that even if you have 60 isaron of flour, you would use just one log of oil. So Tan Rabbanan, so we're going to learn a brisa that explains how each of them come to their position. B'mitzora aniksiv isaron balul the log. This is from Vayikra Perek Yudalid Pasuk Kaf Aleph, which says, V'im dalhu, right? This is dealing with a Mitzorah who's poor. Ve'en yado maseges v'lakach keves, ve'en yado maseges. So, and he doesn't have the wherewithal to buy everything that he was supposed to buy for a rich, which involves 3 animals. V'lakach keves echad asham litnufa. He'll buy one lamb for an asham as a waving, l'chaper alav, to atone for himself, the isaron solas, and he'll take one isaron of flour, echad, isaron solas echad, balul bashemen, and he'll mix it with oil, la mincha, as a mincha, vilog shemen, and it will be a log of oil. So the point is that Isaron, Balul, the log implies that in general, we're going to learn from the Mitzorah case that when you have a mincha offering, for each Isaron, you require a log. Limaid al Isaron Shaton log. That shows that every Isaron requires a log. Divrei Chachamim. That's what the Chachamim say. That's what the Tanakama in our Mishnah. Rabbi Nechemia, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omrim. Rabbi Nechemia says, no, afilu mincha shel shishim esronim ein la ela luga. It only has one log. Shenemar lemincha v'log shaman. Right, that in the same pasuk, that very last words of that juxtaposed. Now, you don't actually read it this way. It's but the juxtaposition, it didn't have to write it this way. So we're going to say the fact that it says lemincha the log shaman, we're going to say it means that you're going to use one log of shaman for as large a mincha as you have. So that could be even up to 60 isaron. So now we're going to try to understand, okay, well, we understand where each one gets it, but what don't they have the other lesson as well? What do they do with that? So Rabbi
Is this a
Nechemia,
disagreement? I'm sorry. This is a disagreement with what we just learned above, that we have a quarter of a log, a half a log. I mean, a quarter.
no, this is a disagreement about other kinds of mincha, the half and the quarter, etc. That was all about the toda. We've now transitioned to talking about all minchas generally, or the vast majority of minchas. It's not every mincha, but most menachot, when they're offered, they again the minimum size is 1 isaron, and the question is do we increase the amount of oil that's used for that isaron as you enlarge the mincha or not? And that's the debate that's in our Mishnah. And that again, that was the debate in our Mishnah. And so now we see two different opinions. According to the Chachamim, you use one per isaron, and according to Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Eliezer, you're going to use one for as many isaronim as you use. So even if it's 60 isaron, you're going to still use just one log of oil. So Rabbi Nechemia, Rabbi Eliezer, Hi isaron balul v'log my avdile. What do they do with the lesson that the Chachamim used? So ahu lugufe. That's needed to teach itself. The ka'amar rachmana laiti chadi saron. That the Torah needs to specifically tell us that you need to bring one isaron for a poor mitzorah. Because if I didn't have that, maybe I would bring something less. The idach legufei lo tzarach. No, and the rabbis, they don't need it to teach anything about the poor mitzorah. Midigale rachmana gabi mitzorah shlosha korbanos ushlosha esronos. From the fact that when it comes to a mitzorah that isn't poor, you have three sacrifices and three isaron of mincha flour. So hacha dechad korban chad isaron. Of course, if you're going to switch it to one sacrifice, right? You're going down from three animals to one. You're going to also go from three esronot to one isaron, to chad isaron. So therefore, you don't need to tell me that. And therefore, the fact that this verse does tell me that, it's telling me that every isaron of a mincha offering outside this context will always require one log of oil. And so if you have five isaron of flour, you're going to need five log of oil. V'idach, 1 second, itzterich. And again, for the other Tanaim, they say that you do need it. Why do you need it? Because Salkatai Tekamina, Ho v'chas rachamana alela tuye bidalos. Since I might have said that we can be compassionate about this poor mitzorah, Ema lowly by mincha klal. Maybe you wouldn't need any mincha at all. So the fact is that not only could you maybe bring less, but maybe you would bring none at all because we want to be nice to the guy.
So what does he
V'ida,
bring then?
what? He would
What would
just
he?
bring the animal. He would just bring the asham. V'idach legamri lo ashkechan. And according to the Chachamim, they say that can't possibly be the explanation because you would never go from something to nothing. And so as a result, you're taking it from three animals and three isaron of a mincha to one animal and nothing. That can't possibly be. Therefore, that's why, in fact, it wasn't necessary to say isaron balul valog in the pasuk, and that's why I can learn. The Chachamim are saying that's why we can learn from here to every other mincha offering and say that every mincha requires a log of shemen for each isaron. V'Rabbanan, hi lemincha v'log shaman my abdile. Well, what about the fact that which was the core lesson that Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Eliezer had, that the last three words of the verse were a juxtaposition of a mincha and log shaman, which suggests that each mincha has one log of shaman regardless of its size. So hahu lemisnadev mincha shelo yifchod midaber haton log. No, that what that's telling you is that anybody who wants to give a voluntary mincha must bring at least an isaron, namely an amount of flour that requires a log. Umaynihu, and what is that volume? That volume is an isaron. So again, so according to the rabbis, according to the Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Eliezer, this is teaching that you have only one log for as large a mincha as you choose. Whereas the rabbis say, no, you're learning that. What you're learning from those words of mincha log shemen, lamincha v'log shamen, is you're learning that if you're voluntarily bringing a mincha, you have to bring a mincha that at least requires a log shamen, which is a mincha that's an isaron of size. V'idach. Well, 1 second. If that's in a lesson that everybody presumably agrees to. So how do the Chachamim I'm sorry, and that's what the Chachamim do with this verse. So how do Rabbi Nechemiah and Rabbi Eliezer learn that a mincha must have at least an isaron? Tarti shamat la'emina. They learn both things from the words lemincha v'log shaman. And so as a result, that's why they can also, they have essentially two lessons, and therefore they are covered as well, and everything has been learned as is necessary.
No, they're learning two things. They're learning that Isaron requires a log. Each
We're learning that a mincha must be at least one isaron
Isaron and
because that requires a log, and they're learning that you can do that for each isaron, and that no matter how many esronim you use, you're going to require one log of shemen, even whether you have 60 or one isaron, it will only require one log of shemen.
Rabbi Nehemiah and Rabbi what's the other
That's
one?
Rabbi Nechemiah and Rabbi Eliezer. That's what.
Eliezer, and they would require a load for each Isaron. So if a
No,
person
no.
has,
That the Chachamim say one log per isaron. Rabbi Nechemiah and Rabbi Eliezer say one log, no matter how large the mincha is,
I
whether it's
thought you
one
just said the
isaron.
opposite just now.
No, no,
Because you said you learned two things for the Rabbanan learned two things, right?
no. Rabbi Nechemiah and Rabbi Eliezer learned two things. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Nechemiah learned two things. They learned first that the mincha, every mincha must have only and
Okay.
exactly one log of shemen, and they learned that a mincha must be at least large enough for a
Right, okay.
log
That's
of
what he said.
shemen, and that means an isaron.
Thought he said the Chachamim. Okay.
Yeah. If I
So
did, that was a speako. Okay. So
so that's an awful lot for a person who doesn't have a lot of funds. If he brings well, 60 Isaron, he's got to bring an awful lot of oil, and it's a lot of
That's
money.
right. He would presumably not want to offer 60 isaron. He would want to offer one isaron because, according to the Chachamim, now according to the Rebbe Eliezer and Rebbe Nehemiah, it's a lot easier because that would avoid the issue because then you would not have a problem because you would be able to. Um, you'd be able to avoid the issue completely by because you no matter whether you offer one or 60, you only offer one log of shemen. So to the extent that the shemen is the more expensive component, you would be okay with respect to that.
Now we raised the point here that in somewhere in the Havamina that maybe we could reduce this to nothing. You could just bring the animal. Now, wouldn't it apply what we learned earlier in a sugya that there's the concept of olav yored. If he doesn't have enough money for the animal, he brings birds. He doesn't
That
have enough money for birds. He just brings the mincha. Wouldn't that
correct.
apply here?
No, because that is a specific chatas offering that is only for certain kinds of sins and not does not apply generally. That is only for certain kinds of sins, and this we're dealing with an asham. This one specifically, the context here is the context of a poor mitzora, and so as a result, that's the situation that's not a carbon olav. It is a carbon that is variable by wealth of the bringer, but it is not a carbon olav. That is a different kind of carbon. That is a chatas offering, not an asham, and it's for specific sins, not does not apply generally. Okay, and even there, right? The wealthier people did not bring a mincha with their offering. It was only an animal, and it switches from only an animal to only a mincha. So it's
Right.
not here. The problem is that you had animal with a mincha, three animals and three isaron, and so as a result, the Chachamim said you didn't need the pasuk to tell us about the isaron for a mitzorah because you figure it out on your own because you would go 3 and 3 to 1 and 1. Okay.
No, I was just thinking if possibly if the olive Yored would apply here, they could bring
Yeah.
the person could bring the mincha without the
Yeah,
animal.
that's a different sacrifice because that's a chata sacrifice. This is dealing with an asha.
Hmm.
So shisha lapar, arba la'ayil, shlosha lakeves. So we said that a bull requires 6 lug of oil, and ram requires 4, and a keves and a lamb requires 3. So Minolan, how do we know that the 6 lug of oil for a bull is what's the requirement? Meaning we know the pasuk tells us chatzi hahin. It's going to tell us half of a hin, but how do we know that a hin is equal to 12 log? Well, that's what we're going to see now. Minalan diksiv v'niskehem chatzi hahin yelapar. We know that a half a hin is going to be for the bull. Hin tresar lugi havyan, and the hin is 12 lug. How do I know that? Diksiv shemen zayis hin that the oil olive oil is a hin. Uksiv shemen mishchas kodesh yeh zeh li ledorosechem. That it and it's an oil of sacred ointment is this is going to be for me for all generations. So zeh begamatria tracer havyam zeh, the word zeh, Zion is 7, Hey is 5. That sums to 12. So that's how we know that it's 12 lug. There's a debate in the Achronim or Rishonim even whether this is an actual lesson or is just a hint of what and not the actual source for this, and it's really halacha l'moshe misinai. But in any event, shlosha umechza lemenorah chatzi v'log v'chol bazner. We said that there needs to be 3.5 log of oil for the menorah, and we said that that's a half a log for each candle, for each lamp. So minahani umili, how do we know this? The Tana Rabbanan me erev boker. So we have a brisa that says, what does me erev boker mean? That it needs to be lit from the nighttime until the morning. Tein midasa, give it the right amount of oil. Shetei dolekas v'holekas me erev boker, that it will stay lit all night. So and that turns out to be we're going to see a half load for each lamp. Davar acher, or it could be, or another lesson that we can learn from it. May erevad boker. What is it telling us? May erevad boker. Ein lecha avodah shekshera may erevad boker elazo bilbad. The only thing that you can do, the service that you can do from evening until morning, is this one. Not that you're supposed to do it at night, but if it goes out, you're supposed to do it in the evening after you bring the last sacrifice of the day. But the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim. But the point is that if it goes out in the middle of the night, you would relight it. Vishiaru chachamim chatzi log miurta va'ad safra, and the amount. And so back to the first of the lessons, the rabbi said that the amount that's required is a half log in order to have it light from nighttime until morning. So Ika de Amri milamala lamata shiaru. There's one opinion that says, how did they determine that the right amount is a half log? Well, they started with a larger amount, and then they worked their way down, seeing how much they could get away with. And some say no, they began with a smaller amount and they increased the amount. So Manda Amar Mata Lamala Shiaru, the one who says they started with a smaller amount and went to a larger amount, HaTorah Chasa Al Mamonan Shal Yisrael. It's because the Torah is worried about the money of the Jewish people, and they don't want us to waste money on oil that would need to be thrown out, because the oil that is unused cannot be used for anything else. It needs to be thrown out because it's effectively hektish, and it's essentially like leftovers on the mizbeach, and you have to just throw it out. Umanda amar mimalo lamata shiaru. Whereas according to the ones who said that you went from larger amounts to smaller amounts, ein aniyus b'makom ashirus, that we don't act poor in the place of where we're rich, meaning in the Beis Hamikdash, we are not going to be worried about cheaping things out. And Rashi helps us out here. So take a look at Rashi. It's opposite the third of the wide lines in the Gemara. Vehechi shiaru, and how did they do this measurement? Ika da amri milamala lamata. Some say you went from the larger to the smaller. Shiaru shebetchila natnu shemen bener v'nishtayr baboker. And then there was, if there was something left over in the morning, ubalayla hasheni pachtu. So they would use less oil the next day. And that's how they figured out eventually that they didn't need anything more than half a log. Afilu bilal or aruch, even on the long nights of the winter. And you would give the same amount of oil even in the short summer nights. And whatever was left in the morning, zorek luchutz, you'd have to throw it out. The Ika da Amar Bekayitz, some people say that in the summertime, when the nights are shorter, Haya Osa Pasila Ava, you would use a thicker wick that would essentially soak up more oil over the course of the night. Ubechorav Hava Pasila Daka. And some people say that you would use, and therefore you would use a thinner wick in the winter so that you would use less oil. Kadeshi Yakala Bekayitz Nami Baboker, so that everything would end up getting used up completely in the morning. Ulamanda Amar Mimata Lamala, and from the opinion that says that you went from a smaller amount to a larger amount, Shebitchila Natanu Revius, they began by giving it a Revius, Va'amdu Sham, and they would stand there. V'ro she'ain sipuk, and they would see that there wasn't enough. V'shov hosifu ad chatzi log, and they would keep adding until they ended up adding a half a log. So those are the two different opinions, and then we go on with the next Mishnah.
This
Ma'arvin,
is similar to a clinical trial, which
yes,
we
absolutely.
learn how much, for how long antibiotics are necessary for treating an infection, for example.
Exactly, 100%. That's exactly the kind of thing that they did. So ma'arbin niske parim beniske elim. So we know that the well let's we'll do this. We'll see the Rashi in a moment, that you're allowed to mix the nesachim. This is referring to the at least initially we think that this is referring to the mincha offering that goes along with a bull, with the mincha offering that goes along with a ram. As Rashi Ksiv Yad, we're going to take a look at the third to last line in the Rashi Ksiv Yad at the very bottom of the page. Ma'arvin niskei parim, minchas niskei parim. We're talking about the mincha offering that goes along with a par. This is the mitzvah that was commanded at the end of Parshas Shlach, that you have to have a mincha offering with and libations with every sacrifice. And if you have a bull, what is the mincha required? B'minchas nische elim, and you can mix it with the mincha of a ram. And why? Lefisha belila shtehen shava. The oil to flour ratio for each of them is equivalent. What is that ratio? Shnei lugin liisaron. Each of them require 2 log for 1 isaron of flour. Tikatani le'el, as we saw earlier, shisha lugin lepar. There are 6 log for a bull. The solas, and how much flour was there for that? Havulahu shlosha esronim. There were 3 esronim of flour. Kediksiv, as the Torah says, v'kriv al bein habakar minchas solas shlosha esronim lapar. Actually, this is from the reading associated with the Rosh Chodesh reading that we have in uh, it's oh no, this is I'm sorry, this is Bamidbar Perek Tesvav Pasuk Tes. And so that's going to require 3 esronim for a bull, balul b'shemen, and you mix it up. So we end up with chatzi hahin, b'shemen chatzi hahin, and you mix it with half a hin of oil. Dahainu shisha lugin, as we saw, that's 6 lug. Ayil, and for a ram, arba lugin, v'sola shnei esronim la'ayil. And so we have 4 lug of oil and 2 esronim. So the bottom line is that it's 2 log of shemen for every isaron of flour for these nisachim, whereas niske kvasim beniske kvasim, and you can mix similarly the nisachim of one lamb with the nisachim of another lamb. As continuing on in the Ksiv Yad Rashi at the bottom of the page, now last line, niske kvasim gimel lugin isaron. They had the ratio of 3 lug for 1 isaron of flour. Diksiv isaron echad la keves ha-echad. Uksiv balul bashemen kasis rivi isahin dahainu gimel. So as a result, you're going to have 1/4 of a hin, which is 3 lug of oil, and it's going to mix with 1 isaron of flour. So for a lamb, you have a 3-to-1 ratio, whereas for rams and bulls, you have a 2-to-1 ratio. So that's why you're not going to mix the two together. Shal Yachud b'Shal Tzibur. When it comes to lambs, whether they're lambs of the community or lambs of the congregation, you can mix those together because they have the same ratio. And then turning to Pei Tetem Abed, Shal Yom b'Shal Emesh, we saw that you can bring the Nisachim offering even 10 days later, so you can mix today's with yesterday's. But you're not allowed to mix the nesachim of a lamb with the nesachim of a bull or a ram because they have different ratios. Ve'im balalan elu b'fnei atzman ve'elu b'fnei atzman. But if you already mix the ingredients of each of them individually, the nitarvu, and then they got mixed together, ksherim, they would still be kosher. And Rashi Ksiv Yad, fourth line down in the Ksiv Yad Rashi towards the bottom of Pei Tetem Bet, but fourth line from the top of the Ksiv Yad. Kirabanan, this is according to the view of the rabbis. Depligi ale de Rebbe Yehuda. They argued with Rebbe Yehuda back in Hakometz Rabbah, back in the earlier chapter of Menachot. V'amri charav shenis arv balol yakriv. They said that even if you have a dry mincha offering that gets mixed up with a mixed mincha offering, meaning a mincha offering that has oil in it, you would still bring the entire. You would still do the kamitzas, and you'd still do the burning of it, and the kohanim would be able, I believe, to eat them. So im ad shelo balal pasol. But if you mix their ingredients before, if you mix the nesachim of the bull or ram with the nesachim of a lamb before the oil and the flour for each of them have been mixed together, so that you're mixing all of them as one combination, that would not work. As Rashi Ksiv Yad says, V'im ad shelo balo, nisarvu psulos, then it will all be puzzle. De be'inon ra'i labila. You need to have the ability to have mixed it. The leka de chasera shel kaves, but you're never going to have had that because you didn't mix the kevis on its own and the aisle on its own, and so you're going to be missing oil when it comes to the lamb, who's supposed to have a 3-to-1 ratio, and you'll have too much oil for the aisle, which is supposed to only have a 2-to-1 ratio. Okay, so hakeves haba im haomer, when it comes to the lamb that's brought with the omer offering, afal pisha mincha so kfula, even though it's double the amount of mincha, as Rashi Ksiv Yad tells us, Kediksiv ba'omer amor emor el hakonim, as we say in Parshas Emor, which is a couple weeks from now, umincha so shnei esronim, that its mincha is going to have 2 esronim, lo hayunasachav kfulim. We don't double the amount of libations that are going with it. We don't double the amount of oil, namely specifically the oil that comes with it as well. So it only has 1 log of oil, not 2. Or minhu, 1 second though, you are telling me that you're not allowed to mix it, but if you did mix it, it would be okay. What about the following brisa? It says v'hiktiro, that you're going to burn it Shelo ya'arev chalavim b'chalavim. You're not allowed to mix things that are going to get burned on the altar. So you can't mix the sacrificial parts. So how could you mix the nesachim together? You're mixing sacrificial parts. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Imnis Arvu Ka'amar. No, really, even though our Mishnah, it sounded like it was lichatchila because it said Arvin niske parim b'niske elim. We're going to say no. It's if it already became mixed, so it's only b'diavad. No, ihachi. If you're going to tell me that our Mishnah is b'diavad, what about the end of our Mishnah? Our end of our Mishnah seems to say the ein ma'arvin niske kvasim b'niske parim be'elim va'afilu nisarvu nami lo. V'hamadik tani seifa balalan elu bifnei atzman ve'elu bifnei atzman v'nisarvu ksherim miklal dereisha lechatchila kamar. But one second, when it came, you're right. When it comes to not mixing a lamb with a bull or a ram, it's clear that in that case, it's going to be that it's only lichatchila you're not allowed to do it. B'diavad, if you did do it and you had them each mixed already, it would be okay. So that implies that our Mishnah is actually telling us what's correct lichatchila. So when it says ma'arvin at the very beginning, it also must be lechatchila. So as a result, we're going to offer two answers, both by Abaye. Abaye's answer number one, Amar Abaye, Hachikamar, ma'arvin yenan imnis arvus saltan vishamnan. No, we had read our Mishnah as referring to the nisachim, meaning the mincha offering that comes with an animal offering. But we're going to say, no, it's not talking about the mincha offering that comes with an animal offering. It's talking about the wine that comes as a part of the nisachim that goes with a an animal offering. And so, if in fact, so what it's telling us is if their flour and oil has already been mixed, well, then you can mix the wine together as well. The yenan lechatchila lo. One second. Why would you not be able to mix the wine lechatchila v'hatanya b'medvar amamurim? Where did we say that you're not supposed to mix the nesachim of bulls and rams? B'solas v'shemen. That's specifically talking about flour and oil. Aval yayin ma'arvin. But when it comes to the mixing of the wine between the two, you can do it. So Ella Amar Abaye. So Abaye adjusts his answers. Hachi kamar. Heicha de hukter saltan v'shamnan. No, when the flour and oil have already been burned on the altar, well, then that's where the Baraiso is telling us ma'arvin yayin lechatchila. Then you could mix even the wine together lechatchila. But heicha de lo hukter, where the flour and oil have not yet been burned on the altar, that's where our Mishnah is telling us Imnis Arev Saltan Bishamnan. If you mix together the flour and oil already, so then Ma'arvin Nami Yenan, well, then you can mix together their wine as well. V'im Lav, but if not, Ein Ma'arvin, then we're not going to allow you to mix together the wine because Dilma Asi Aruve Solus Vishemin Lichatchila, because we might think that you'd be allowed to mix the flour and oil of two different sacrifices, lichatchila, and that's not permitted. Okay, and so that brings us to the two dots, where we now discuss keves haba im haomer. We said that the
Now, with the Mishnah, however, mentions it says the kivasim, and then it says elim ve parim ve'elim. Now,
correct.
so not to mix the kevis with elim parim ve'elim, but does that mean lachatchila in any case, according to everyone, that the parim and the elim could be mixed and the kevis is separate?
Now, remember, we're not talking about mixing the
I
animals.
understand that.
We're talking about mixing them in the
Right.
nesachim, and the answer is that even lichatchila, we would not mix together the flour and oil. That in fact, and I'm sorry, our Mishnah is, even though we translated initially as talking about the mincha offering, really the Mishnah is talking about the um, the wine, and the wine offering can be mixed together if, in fact, you've already offered the mincha offering, but if not, then you can only mix it together if you already have the flour and oil of the two sacrifices mixed together, because we don't want you to think that you can lichatchila mix together the flour and oil of two different sacrifices. That, in fact, mixing together the flour and oil of two different sacrifices, even if they're in the same category, you cannot do that lichatchila. So that's where we come out on this. So
That's
again,
the oil, right? The oil and the mincha. But
the
but
oil and mincha, if you have the oil and mincha combination of a keves, of a lamb and a ram, and now you've put them together, then even though you weren't supposed to put them together, as long as they were initially mixed separately, you're going to be A, okay, and B, you're going to be able to now mix the wine in that situation, even lechatchila.
uh, well, what would be b'di'evet for the wine after they're already burned?
So if no, the b'di'evet situation for the wine uh, is that if in fact you never mixed the flour and oil of the two different sacrifices together, but rather had them separate, and then you put the wine together, that we don't actually say what would happen. It would seem like you would just pour it all together, even b'di'avad, but it's not explicit in the Gemara.
Right. Okay. But my original question was, and I'm not sure that you answered that, was, are we considering the parim and the elim as one group, so they could always be mixed together, the lachatchila and so forth, and then the kevis would be with either one of them or with the two of them together. That's a group, elim and parim. There would be no issue whatsoever because the Mishnah seems to separate kevis versus
Correct.
elim v'paraim.
Correct. The Mishnah is telling us that in the as explained by Abaye, the Mishnah ends up saying that in those situations you could potentially mix the it would seem like you can mix the wine of those two even lechatchila. That's the way I'm understanding this.
And certainly you could mix the isaron and the mincha, isaron and the oil lechatchila with those two animals.
And
The parim and the elim, those could
yeah,
always be mixed together
the
before or
parim and the
after.
elim, correct. The parim and the elim can always be mixed together. That's correct.
Uh-huh. Whether burned early, whether burned before, burned after, whatever it is, it doesn't matter.
Right. I mean, here the note here puts five different categories when it comes to mixing the flour and oil of separate menachot. So this is going to be forbidden in general because it said, as we saw that that was the question that we asked because it says v'hiktiro. So you're not supposed to mix any of them together, even if they're the same mixture. If you had minchas that are of equal ratios and you mix them together. So then um, then the question is, did you mix the oil with the flour ahead of time? If you already mixed the flour with the oil ahead of time, then all mixtures of minchas are going to be okay. So in the end, right? Maybe I'll update what I said. So in the end, our Mishnah is talking effectively about both kinds of mixings when it comes to uh, uh, flour and oil, and mixing those mincha offerings of a bull and a lamb together. So you're not, no matter what kind of animals you're talking about, even bull and bull, you're not supposed to mix lichatchila. When it comes to mixing the raw ingredients, if you already mixed the flour of the bull and the flour of a ram together, and now you're adding the oil of the ram and the oil of the bull into it and mixing it, that's going to be okay b'diavad because they have the same ratio. Okay. When it
Hmm.
comes to if you already mixed the oil and flour of a lamb and you have separately the oil and flour mixed of a ram or bull, and now you mix them together, again, lichatchila, you shouldn't do it, but b'diavad, you did do it, you're going to also be okay. Okay, so those
Hmm.
are the three cases with respect to the flour and oil, meaning never do it lechatchila, b'diavad. If you have the ingredients already mixed, it's going to always be okay, b'diavad. And if you don't have the ingredients already mixed, well then, as long as you're staying within the same ratio, so keves with keves or par and ayil with par and ayil, so then again, also b'diavad, you'll be okay. Okay, so that's with respect to flour and oil. With respect to wine, again, you're not supposed to mix it lichatchila. If the flours and oil of the two animals have already been mixed or have been already burnt, well, then you can mix them. And what isn't clear is what about the bidiyavad situation where you mix the wine in a situation where the menachot were not mixed? You know, is that now going to be puzzle and you're going to be invalid? You'll need to bring new wine, or do we say no? In that situation, b'diavad it'll be okay. It seems like we would say that it's not going to be okay, and so that may be a little different from what I said earlier. Okay. And so that is, those are the various situations, whether you have to look at each of the situations separately when it comes to the mincha part and when it comes to the wine part. Okay, so now the Mishnah mentioned keves habayim omer, that the lamb that comes with the omer offering, it's going to have two isaron of flour, but it's going to I'm sorry, that with the yes, with the lamb that comes with the mincha offering, with the omer offering, it's going to have two isaron of flour, but it's going to have one log of shemen. So Tan Rabbanan uminchaso shnei asronim. That the mincha, this is talking about the mincha of the omer. It's perik kaf gimel pasuk yud gimel in Vayikra. And it says that the mincha is going to be two isaron. Limeid al keves habayim omer. So this is teaching about the lamb that is brought with the Omer offering, that its mincha offering, shemincha so kfula, it has a double mincha offering. It's going to be two isaron. Yachol b'shem shemincha so kfula kach yeno kaful. I might have thought that just as the flour is doubled, so too is the wine. Talmud lomar benisko yayin revi sahin. So no, it says specifically that the amount of wine is a quarter of a hin, namely that's yachol. So that's three log. Yachol lo yehe no kaful. So maybe it's wine, meaning that, and that's the amount of wine that's required with a regular lamb offering. So maybe you might say that the wine doesn't get doubled because you don't mix the wine with the flour. But you would double the oil because it is combined with the flour. Talmud Lomar Vinisko. So the Torah says the word Vinisko. Kol nichsachav lo yehu ela revius. So both its wine and its oil should be a quarter hin. So this is actually in. I said a log of shemen last time. It's not a log. It's three log, but it's that it should be three log of shemen for this mincha offering for the 2 isaron of flour. So even though ordinarily a lamb comes with 3 log of oil for every isaron, for 1 isaron when it comes to a lamb, excuse me. In this particular lamb, we're going to have 3 log of oil for 2 isaron of flour. So my Talmudah, how do you
Which
learn from the word vinisko? The fact that it's supposed to mean that the same amount of oil and wine is used, namely a quarter hin, which is 3 log of oil. Rabbi Lazar, ksiv viniska. Though it is written in Perek Kaf Gimel Pasuk Yud Gimel of Vayikra, it's written with a hey, not a vav at the end. Ukarinan vinisko, and we read it vinisko. So with a vav. So Ketzad, what is that? How do we explain that? Viniska de mincha, kenisko de yayin. That when it comes to the thing that goes along with the mincha, namely the oil, that's going to be like the amount of wine. Mayayin revius, just as the wine is a revius of a hin, which is 3 log, av shemen nami revius. So too, the oil is going to be a revius of a hin, which is 3 log. Okay. So we'll try and get to the Mishnah on the next staff just so that we come to a nice stopping spot. So
and
Rabbi,
which kevis is this?
this is the keves that is brought with the Omer offering, which I guess could be said to be a Daf Yomi coincidence because, of course, we just finished Pesach and the Omer is offered on the second day of Pesach.
But every other kevis is
But in
three.
general, a keves would have a nesachim that would involve 1 isaron of flour and 3 log of oil. So the same amount of oil. So that's exactly what our Mishnah said, that we use the same amount of oil, even though we're using double the amount of flour when it comes to the keves that's associated with the Omer offering.
It's a shnei isaron here.
Correct. You're
Yeah,
using 2 isaron
right,
instead of
right,
one. So
right,
we use double the amount that we would ordinarily
right,
have for the nesachim that's associated with a lamb.
right.
So I'm Rabbi Yochanan, and this statement of Rabbi Yochanan is we're going to raise the Mitzorah, the Omer situation. And so as a result, that's why this is being brought here. Asham Mitzorah Shishchato Shelo Lishmo. If you slaughter the Asham of a Mitzorah and you don't have in mind the right sacrifice, now we know that the asham is not one of the sacrifices that becomes invalid. That's just a chatas and a pesach. So as a result, the korban should remain valid. It just no longer counts for its owner's purpose. So the owner will have to bring another one. Well, ta'un nesachim. Rabbi Yochanan is teaching that the nesachim that are required for the Mitzorah's asham are going to still be required for it. She'im iyata omer came, because if you don't say so, if you don't bring the right nesachim for the asham mitzorah, pisalto, you'll end up making it invalid. And we know that even an asham that's brought Shelo Lishmo remains valid. It just doesn't fulfill the purpose of the person's bringing it. So Maskif la Rav Menachot Bar Gada. So Rav Menachot asks Elamiata if that's true. Keves habaim haomer, when it comes to the lamb that's brought with the omer, shishchato shelo lishmo, that if you slaughtered it not for its own sake, tehei minchaso kfula, do you need to still bring double the mincha offering? Meaning, do you need to bring 2 isaron of flour? She'im iata omer kain, because if you don't say you do so, pisalto, isn't that lamb offering no longer going to be valid because the lamb offering that's associated with the Omer is supposed to have double the flour and have 2 isaron? And similarly, v'tamid shel shachar sheshchato shelo lishmo. If you slaughter the morning tamid offering, yehe ta'on shnei gzirin b'kohen echad. What about the fact that in order to bring that sacrifice, you're going to put two new blocks of wood on the mizbeach by a kohen? And she'im iatao merkain, because if you don't say so, pisalto, you've made that sacrifice invalid. After all, don't you have to bring the korban tamid in the morning with those two blocks of wood? The tamid shall ben arbayim, and similarly, shishchato shalolishmo yetan shnei gzirim b'shnei kohanim. And similarly, in the afternoon, when two blocks of wood are brought by two kohanim in connection with the tamid shall ben arbayim, doesn't that also need to happen? She'im iatao merkain pisalto. Well, haven't you caused it to be invalid if you don't do that? So, answer number one, ein hachinami. 100%. You are absolutely right that, in fact, all of these situations require the additional elements that you've mentioned. Ella Amar Abaye, and Abaye explains why was it that Rabbi Yochanan only mentioned one of them? He just mentioned one case. He didn't mention the Mitzoros Asham case, but it's true for all of them. Rava disagrees, and he says, again, this is the Dalit changes it from Rabbi Abba to Rava, and he says no. Bishlama hanach olos ninhu. All of the cases that you just mentioned, namely the keves that's brought with the omer, and the korban tamid in the morning, and the korban tamid in the afternoon, all of them are ola offerings. And as we turn to Tzaddik Amud Aleph, ilo chazul olas chova, and if they're not fit for an ola that is an obligatory, karve laolas nadava, let them be brought as a voluntary offering, and then they won't need these extra things. So as a result, it will be totally fine. Elahacha, but when it comes to the mitzora of the asham of a mitzora, ilo mukmis leim b'milsei, if you don't allow it to bring those additional items, meaning if you don't have it come with the if you don't have it come with the nisachim that are specifically required for it, then what it's not going to be valid. Asham nidava mi'ika. Is there any voluntary asham? Of course not. There isn't such a thing. As Rashi tells us, asham nidava mi'ika. Hilkach lo huter likarev lemizbeach ella al yedei nesachim. The only way that you can bring this asham is if you have the proper nesachim that's associated with it. So Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Yochanan. In fact, we have a brisa that's consistent with Rabbi Yochanan. Asham mitzorah sheshchato shelo lishmo. If you slaughter a mitzorah's asham, not for the right reason, o shelo nasam midamo al gabi bahonos, or you fail to apply the blood on the thumb and big toe and ear of the mitzorah as you require to, harezo ola lagabi mizbech. It's basically like harezo ola al lagabi mizbech. You still bring it onto the altar. However, v'tar nesachim, but it requires the special nesachim. V'tzarech asham acher lahatiro. But you're still going to need another asham to allow this mitzorah to go into the camp, because although it's going to be a valid sacrifice that gets burned on the altar, it is not a valid sacrifice because was brought with the wrong intention, so it will not satisfy the owner's requirement. So as a result, this then becomes, according to Rava, the one exception of where you're not going to effectively treat it like an ola, but rather you're going to essentially treat it differently and have to bring extra things that were associated with the original sacrifice.
How do
Okay?
we call it valid then? I mean,
Because
valid for
you're
what?
valid for the purpose of burning it on the altar. And as a result of it being burned on the altar, the edible portions of the asham that go to the Kohanim would continue to go to the Kohanim.
So why not say it's like in other cases, it's invalid and burn it in the makom hashrefa, which is chutz le mizbeach.
That's the that you're what you're highlighting is exactly the difference between it being a kosher as a sacrifice and not kosher as a sacrifice. If we were to do that, that would be essentially saying that it's not kosher as a sacrifice, but it is still valid. You only had the wrong intention, so you don't fulfill the owner's obligation, but you still treat it as if it was a valid sacrifice, meaning that the Kohanim get to eat it, the altar gets to consume it, etc.
So it's well, why is it not a valid sacrifice? We said the reason was because he didn't put the blood on his fingers or his
Either he didn't put the blood on the fingers, so as a result, he has to go through the full process of
but what
purification.
he just why is that? That's not an intention. He just forgot to put the blood on his fingers.
Correct. No, but the line before that was shishchato shelo lishmo. The alternative is either he slaughtered it not for its own sake, or he failed to put the blood on his fingers. So the point is that either of those is sufficient to make it invalid for its purpose, but it still gets treated as a valid sacrifice for burning on the altar and for the Kohanim to get the remnants.
Well, what what is even when we're saying earlier in the beginning of this where Amar Rav Yochanan Asher Mitzvah Shachato Shelo Lishmo. Well, how is he? I mean, what's in his mind? Why is he even bringing it? How can he say the Shachato Shelo Lishmo?
Well, the
What other
Kohen made a
reason would he
mistake.
have?
The Kohen made a mistake. He thought he was bringing it as a different kind of asham,
The
or he
Kohen
thought he
made a
was.
mistake, but the person is bringing it.
Yes, but the Kohen is the one who slaughters it and has in mind
Oh,
all the right thing. Has to have in mind all the right things when he's bring doing all the service items.
so the Kohen makes a mistake, and the Mitzorah it has to spend the money by another one.
Correct, correct. And the question is does the Kohen owe him
Yeah,
it?
exactly. Does the Kohen have to
Yeah.
compensate him?
Correct. That's one of the questions that we haven't really dealt with during the whole course of our learning of Zvachim and Menachos. My understanding um, is that because this is a harm that's not visible, I think that effectively there is no damage, and so it's a terrible situation, and one would hope that the Kohanim would stand up and say, "I'm going to take care of you." But I don't think that it's technically required. But obviously, if he does it intentionally, then it's a whole different story. But in general, we're dealing with this lack of intention. If he does it intentionally, again, I think that in that situation he would have to do it. But we haven't yet covered that. So hopefully we'll get to that at some point.
Well, the Kohen has to admit this, right? We don't know what's in his mind.
Correct. The Cohen obviously has to admit that he made a mistake. Otherwise, we would never even find out about it. That it's sort of like, with airplane crashes. There's the rule is basically if you got into an almost accident in an airplane, there's going to be no punishment or ramifications for the pilot because we want the pilots to report it so that as a result we get more better data and prevent accidents. And it's really quite remarkable if you look at well, sort of when that rule was implemented, you ended up with many fewer accidents after that rule was changed and implemented than before. So my guess is that if in fact we say that the Kohanim are not liable, it probably resulted in a lot more of announcements, but it probably also resulted in fewer incidents. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that were the case, that it would require the Kohanim to say something. But my guess is that requiring them to say something but not punishing them will result in fewer instances of korbanot being offered for the wrong purpose.
In case of airplanes, though, there's a black box. So when they recover the box, they
That you're dealing with an actual accident situation. I'm talking about where a pilot made a mistake or a pilot
oh
did something that almost resulted in an accident.
oh
Where there's no data that would necessarily be ever checked. And the point is by having a mandatory but effectively no punishment system for announcing it. So then again, it's I'm and obviously this is just an analogy. I'm not actually saying that this is that Hashem's thinking was along these lines. But the truth is that that has a very powerful impact on the way people behave by having things announced like that. And so interesting to think about. All right. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. Have a great day and wonderful Shabbos. And God willing, I'll be back in person and on Zoom next week. Looking forward to learning together.